So tonight, we're talking about pirates. Now, pirates are one of those things where the reality is really interesting, but also kind of gross. If you watch movies or play video games about pirates, you probably imagine sailing across the ocean, finding buried treasure, and maybe having a parrot on your shoulder. But real pirate life was far more disgusting, far more dangerous, and not at all romantic. In fact, if you actually woke up one morning in the 17th or 18th century and found yourself on a pirate ship, the first thing you'd probably notice is the smell. Imagine dozens of men crammed into a small wooden vessel, with no bathrooms, no clean water, and no way to escape the heat or cold. The stench of sweat, vomit, urine, and spoiled food was overwhelming. Add to that the smell of gunpowder, tar, and unwashed clothes, and you start to get a picture. The first thing a man noticed upon waking aboard a pirate ship was not the sea, nor the horizon, nor even the creak of timbers. It was the smell. It clung to the air like a curse. The reek of sweat ground into wood, of unwashed bodies packed too tightly, of spoiled fish left too long in the barrel. There was the bite of gunpowder, the stench of tar, the sour note of vomit in the corners. Some said the smell never left a man once he breathed it long enough. That even ashore, he carried it with him, like an invisible brand marking him as one of the damned. For a boy like Matthew Carter, barely 17, it was a shock sharper than the lash. He had thought the sea meant freedom, gulls wheeling above blue waves, the spray of salt wind, the romance sung in taverns. Instead, he woke in a hold where rats gnawed at biscuit crumbs, where men coughed blood into their palms, and where the air itself felt like it was rotting. The ship's surgeon, a man called Gray, joked bitterly that you could diagnose a vessel by its smell. A merchantman smelled of spices and wool, a navy frigate of polish and powder, and a pirate ship of death rehearsing itself. Few laughed at the joke. Most knew it was true. Space was as scarce as clean air. Hammocks hung so close that when one man turned, the other felt his elbow. Lice crawled as freely as sailors. Food was little more than salted pork, crawling with maggots by the third week, or hardtack biscuits that shattered teeth. Water, stored in barrels, turned green with scum before long, and so rum became the drink of survival, not for pleasure, but because it burned away the taste of rot. Yet within this stench and squalor lived stories, men with scars that map old battles, boys pressed into service from the docks, women disguised as sailors to escape the lives they had left ashore. They all shared the same air, the same hunger, the same gamble that tomorrow might bring a prize rich enough to make the filth bearable. Matthew listened to the older hands. One told of a mutiny where 30 men had fought in this very stake for a chest that turned out to be filled with nothing but wet sand. Another remembered the Caribbean sun baking corpses until even the gulls avoided them. The lesson was simple. A pirate ship was less a vessel than a coffin that floated, unless luck, cunning, or sheer cruelty kept it moving another day. And still, each dawn, the men rose. They scraped the deck, patched sails, loaded pistols, and swore their oaths. For however foul it was, the sea offered something the shore never did, a chance, however small, to seize life rather than be crushed by it. Matthew soon learned that on a pirate ship, privacy was a word that belonged to poets, not sailors. A man's life was constantly tangled with the lives of others. If one coughed in the night, 5 more woke. If one turned sour with fever, the whole crew felt its weight. And if one stole from the mess or cheated in dividing shares, the punishment was swift, a fist, a rope, or sometimes the sea itself swallowing him whole. The decks were alive with noise, the groaning of timbers that seemed always on the verge of snapping, the shrill cry of gulls circling in hope of scraps, the endless curses of sailors who had seen too many storms and buried too many brothers. To a newcomer, it felt like stepping into a cage where even the air had teeth. There was Elias, an older hand with a face so seamed by weather it looked carved out of driftwood. He had once sailed merchant routes for honest pay until a press gang dragged him away drunk from a tavern. Now he spat over the rail each morning and muttered that death on land would have been cleaner. Yet in the dark hours, when the sea howled loudest, he would sing in a cracked voice the lullabies his mother had sung him, as if to remind himself he had once been more than a weapon wielded by hunger. There was Jonah Briggs, who claimed he had joined the pirates willingly. He boasted of treasure he had seen, of towns burned for ransom, of the day he drank rum from a silver chalice stolen off a governor's table. But at night, he rubbed the scar on his wrist, the mark of shackles, and his eyes went distant, as if remembering chains heavier than any rope aboard. The Surgeon Gray carried his tools in a wooden chest no bigger than a loaf of bread. A bone saw, a few knives, a jar of leeches, bandages torn from sailcloth. These were the thin defenses against the ocean's cruelty. Men dreaded his summons. A sailor who went into Gray's corner often came out lighter by a limb, if he came out at all. Once Matthew saw him hack through a man's rotting leg, while two others held the screaming victim down. Gray wiped his brow with the same rag he had used to clean the blade, muttering, "Better half a man than none." Food became the cruelest joke of all. The hardtack biscuits were so riddled with weevils that the crew would joke about which part had more meat, the bread or the bugs. Salt pork sweated grease that smelled rancid even before it reached a man's lips. Those with strong stomachs ate in silence. Those with weak ones learned quickly that hunger was less deadly than pride. Matthew remembered gnawing on a biscuit so hard it chipped his tooth. The men laughed, and he laughed with them, because laughter was the only shield left. And always there was thirst. Water barrels grew foul within weeks. Green slime floated on the surface, and a sour stench rose with every ladle. Men closed their eyes and drank anyway. Rum was safer, but it dulled the senses, made tempers flare, and turned quarrels into knife fights. One evening, after three men had quarreled over a spilled cup, the captain himself struck the offender with the flat of his cutlass, growling, "We'll fight the Navy, not each other." But Matthew saw the fury still smoldering in their eyes. Disease was the ship's true master. Scurvy crept silently, loosening teeth, blackening gums, turning once strong men into shivering skeletons. Fever burned through the hammocks, leaving men too weak to stand, their sweat soaking the boards until the wood itself seemed sick. Gray worked tirelessly, but he could not cure the ocean. At night, the ship sounded less like a vessel and more like a hospital where the sick groaned and prayed, and the healthy pretended not to hear. Yet even in misery, men clung to small rituals. Some carved charms out of bone or wood, hoping they would keep death at bay. Others scratched cards on scraps of parchment, gambling away coins they did not have. Elias, the old sailor, whittled tiny figures of ships and left them wedged between the planks, as if he hoped the sea would spare the vessel for the sake of its miniature twin. Matthew himself began keeping a small journal, though he could barely write. He marked the days with crude drawings, a gull, a knife, a cross, to prove to himself the time was still passing. The smell never lessened, the hunger never faded, and the danger never rested. But slowly, Matthew understood why men endured. For all the filth, the lash, the blood, there was something else, freedom. No king commanded them, no landlord stole their bread, no master dictated their wages. They lived by their own code, crooked, brutal, fragile, but their own. And in that harsh fellowship, in the shared coffin that somehow floated, some men found a kind of belonging they had never known ashore. The first weeks at sea broke men faster than battles ever could. The ocean was not patient nor forgiving. Each day was a test of body and will, and each night was a gamble with madness. For a boy like Matthew, everything was new, and yet it all carried the weight of doom. The captain ruled the ship with eyes like storm clouds. His name was Nathaniel Crow, though men whispered other titles when he passed: the Iron Gull, the Hangman's Son, the Man Who Never Sleeps. His coat was stitched with patches from a dozen nations, trophies of ships he had plundered. Life on the deck was labor without end. The sails were patched with tar and prayers, the rope stiff with salt and blood. Men climbed the rigging like ants upon a carcass, their bare feet gripping rope until skin peeled raw. The youngest, Ibrahim, still barely more than a boy, scampered among them, tying knots faster than seasoned sailors. He laughed even when his hands bled, and the older men shook their heads, muttering that laughter never lasted long at sea. The ship herself, the Mercy's fortune, though Mercy was the last thing she carried, was a beast of contradictions. Her decks were narrow, her hull deep, her guns patched and mismatched from every vessel they had ever robbed. Some cannons bore Spanish crests, others Dutch markings, one still bearing the royal arms of England, though the barrel had been cracked and reforged. The ship was a floating graveyard of nations, bound together by desperation and greed. Meals were swallowed quickly, often standing, always with one eye on the waves. Men chewed dried meat until their jaws ached, drank rum until they forgot its burn, not on hardtack with curses between bites. Some prayed before eating, others spat, claiming that prayer on a pirate ship was wasted breath. The cook, Marta, did what she could, boiling thin stews with herbs she bought at ports. But even her clever hands could not make filth taste like feast in the evenings. When work paused and the sun bled into the horizon, the men told stories. Some told of treasure buried on islands that changed shape with the tide. Others spoke of sea serpents longer than the ship itself, whose eyes glowed green in the dark. One old sailor, Elias, swore he had seen a ghostly fleet on a moonless night, ships with no sails, drifting silent, crewed by the dead who had never found shore. Matthew listened wide-eyed, though he quickly learned the difference between stories told to pass the time and truths muttered. When rum loosened tongues, the truth was uglier. Treasure was rare, death was common, and if the sea kept any secrets, it was that the ocean cared for no man, pirate or king alike. The first real test came one gray morning when a merchantman was sighted on the horizon. The cry went up, "Sail ho!" Men rushed to their stations. Crow emerged from his cabin with the calm of a man walking into church. He raised his spyglass, studied the distant ship, and gave a single nod. "Dutch colors, heavy with trade. She's ours." The Mercy's fortune moved like a predator. Sails filled with wind, ropes strained, cannons were dragged into place. Men spat on their hands, sharpened blades, whispered prayers. The drummer boy, no older than 12, beat a slow rhythm to steady their hearts. Matthew felt his stomach twist. He had never fought in his life, never even raised a knife in anger. Now he was to take part in robbery, maybe murder. As they closed the distance, the merchantman tried to flee, turning her sails sharp against the wind. But Crow had chosen his prey well. The pirate ship was faster, leaner, hungry. Within an hour, they were upon her. Muskets cracked, cannon roared. Smoke rolled across the water, thick and choking. Matthew clutched a pistol, hands trembling, as men screamed around him. He saw faces, a merchant sailor loading a musket, eyes wide with terror. Another man clutching a cutlass, swinging wildly. Then a grappling hook bit into the merchantman's rail, and the pirates surged across like a tide. Matthew was carried with them, stumbling, his blade slick in his grip. The fight was chaos. Steel rang on steel, bodies slammed against wood, the air filled with blood and smoke. Matthew's world shrank to the space before him, a man lunging with a knife. His own desperate block, the hot sting as the blade glanced his arm. He struck back without thought, and the man fell. For a heartbeat, Matthew stared, frozen, the weight of what he had done pressing harder than the sea itself. But there was no time for reckoning. The battle raged. Pirates shouted, merchants begged, guns cracked, ropes burned. Captain Crow strode among it all like a figure out of legend, his blade flashing, his voice steady. "Take the ship, take her alive," he commanded, and the men obeyed. When it was over, the merchantman lay broken, her crew disarmed, her cargo already being dragged to the pirate hold. The deck was red with blood. Matthew stood shaking, his breath ragged, his hands numb. He had survived his first battle, but he knew something had changed inside him. The boy who had boarded the Mercy's fortune was gone. In his place stood something harder, something he was not sure he wanted to be. That night, as the pirates divided spoils, barrels of sugar, crates of spices, silks that gleamed even in the dim lantern light, Matthew sat apart. He stared at his blood-stained sleeve, at his chipped tooth, at the trembling in his fingers. Elias sat beside him, chewing on a piece of salted meat. "You did what you had to, lad," the old sailor said quietly. "The sea don't ask for permission. She takes, and now you take too. That's the way of it." Matthew nodded, though his stomach turned. Somewhere, ashore, a family would go hungry because of what he had helped to steal. Somewhere, a mother would weep for a son who had not returned. He told himself it was survival, that he had no choice. But he knew the sea had already begun to carve its mark into his soul. The day after the capture of the Dutch merchantman dawned gray and heavy, as if the heavens themselves mourned what had been spilled upon the sea. The pirate ship, now swollen with plunder, creaked under the new weight of sugar, spice, and silk. Yet for the men aboard, the morning carried no sorrow. Their bellies were fuller, their pockets heavier, and their laughter, though coarse, rang like victory drums. Captain Crow held court on the quarterdeck. Spoils were tallied, divided by shares, each man receiving according to his station. The captain took 2, the quartermaster 1.5, the gunners 1.25, the rest a single share. Even the drummer boy was tossed a coin, though he grinned more at the recognition than the silver. Justice, of a sort, ruled here, but justice written in salt and blood, not parchment and seal. Matthew watched the ritual with awe. He saw how quickly greed burned in men's eyes, how hands shook as they clutched their winnings. Some tucked coins into boots, others bid them to test their worth. One man, Briggs, kissed his handful of silver as though it were a lover returned from war. But alongside riches came reminders of the law. A sailor accused of pocketing more than his due was dragged before the mast. The crew formed a circle, their faces hungry for spectacle. The quartermaster read the charge, his voice flat, his eyes colder than crow steel. The accused denied it, swearing by God, by the sea, by his mother's grave. His pleas were useless. Crow stepped forward, silent, and drew his blade. For a moment, Matthew thought he would strike the man down. Instead, he slashed the thief's ear clean off and cast it into the waves. "Better the ear than the hand," Crow said simply. "Let the sea keep his lies." The men roared approval, some jeering, others laughing. The thief clutched his bleeding wound, half fainting, but alive. Mercy, perhaps, in Crow's ledger. Yet Matthew shuddered, for he saw that mercy here was only another mask of cruelty. The days that followed blurred into labor. The plunder had to be stowed, the deck scrubbed of blood, the wounded tended. Marred of the cooked boiled broths thick with spice stolen from the Dutchman. And for a brief moment the ship smelled not of rot, but of cinnamon and clove. Men sang as they ate, their voices cracked but fierce. For a night, they almost forgot the faces of those they had slain. But the sea never allowed joy to linger long. On the 4th night, the wind shifted, and clouds rolled blacker than iron across the horizon. The boatswain shouted orders, men scrambled up rigging, sails reefed tight. Matthew clung to a rope as the first drops lashed his face. Thunder cracked, rolling across the waves like cannon fire. Lightning tore the sky in jagged scars. The Mercy's fortune bucked like a beast possessed. Waves rose higher than the masts, crashing over the deck, sweeping men from their feet. Ropes snapped, timbers groaned, the hull shuddered under the weight of the storm. Matthew found himself waist deep in sea water, struggling to breathe as salt stung his eyes. He thought of drowning, of his lungs filling, of sinking into a blackness that hours dragged like years. Men prayed, cursed, wept. One was swept overboard, his scream cut short as the waves swallowed him. Another's hand was crushed beneath a pulley, blood mingling with rain until it was impossible to tell where man ended and storm began. And then, as suddenly as it had risen, the fury passed. Dawn broke pale and trembling, the sea rolling calm once more. The Mercy's fortune floated battered but unbroken, Her crew sprawled across the deck like corpses come back to life. Matthew lay on his back, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the sky. Never had Blue seemed so strange, so fragile, so holy. Around him, men groaned, coughed, or wept quietly. Elias patted his shoulder with a hand rough as rope. First storm's always the worst. Boy, if you live through it, the sea's given you her measure. Whether she spares you again, well, that's another matter. That day, they buried the dead at sea. The bodies were sewn into hammocks, weighted with shot, and slid into the waves. Some men crossed themselves, others spat. One whispered a prayer in Arabic, another muttered a curse in Dutch. The ocean received them all the same, indifferent. Matthew watched each splash, each widening ring on the water, and wondered if the sea would one day take him to Dot by nightfall. The men gathered again, weary but alive. Rum was passed, songs were sung, laughter forced but real. They toasted survival, cursed the storm, and swore that no navy or gale could break them. Yet in their eyes flickered a truth none would say aloud. The sea had shown her teeth, and they were sharper than any blade. For Matthew, the storm carved deeper than any battle. Steel killed a man. The sea killed hope itself. He understood now that piracy was not only robbery, nor freedom, nor brotherhood. It was survival against a world that wanted them dead, and sometimes survival itself was the cruelest treasure of all. The storm had scarred the men in body and in spirit, yet there was little time to rest. The Dutch merchantman that had been taken days earlier still carried prisoners, her surviving crew, chained in the dark of the lower hold. Their presence hung over the pirates like the smell of tar, constant and unavoidable. Matthew had never seen prisoners before. When Crow ordered him and to others to carry food below, he descended the ladder into air so foul it made his stomach twist. The hold was damp, lit only by a swaying lantern. There, huddled like cattle, sat a dozen men, their wrists bound, their eyes hollow. Some muttered prayers, others stared blankly as if their souls had already departed. One of them lifted his head as Matthew passed. His beard was tangled, his lips swollen from some blow, yet his gaze burned with defiance. He spat on the deck. "You will hang," he rasped in Dutch accent and English. "Every one of you. The noose waits for your kind." Matthew froze, but the pirate beside him, Briggs, only laughed. He set down the bucket of weevil-riddled hardtack and leaned close. "Maybe, friend," he whispered, his breath reeking of rum. "But tonight, we eat, and you starve." He kicked the bucket toward the prisoners, who scrambled like animals for crumbs. That night Matthew could not sleep. The prisoners' eyes haunted him, not because of their hatred, but because they mirrored his own fear. He wondered if, had fate shifted, he too might have been in chains, starving in the dark. Discipline among pirates was a strange beast. They claimed freedom, equality, and brotherhood, yet their code was sharper than any king's law. Captain Crow did not rule by whim alone. The articles, a set of rules agreed upon by the crew, governed their lives. No man could gamble without permission. No man could strike another aboard without challenge. Loot was shared by measure, not stolen in secret, and every man had a vote when decisions touched them all. But punishment was brutal. A thief lost his ear, as Matthew had seen. A mutineer was marooned, left on a barren island with nothing but a pistol and one shot. A coward in battle was flogged until his back bled raw. Rumors whispered of worse. Men dragged beneath the keel, their skin scraped from bone by barnacles. Men tied to the mast in storms until lightning claimed them. The code was freedom, yes, but freedom bought with fear. Crow himself was both judge and enforcer. He spoke little, yet his presence alone silenced quarrels. To defy him was to defy the sea itself. And though some whispered he was cruel, others insisted his fairness was what kept them alive. For in a world of hunger, greed, and death, even cruelty could be a kind of order. The prisoners were brought on deck one morning, their chains clanking, their faces pale from lack of sun. The crew gathered, curious, restless. Crow stood at the rail, his coat whipping in the wind. "These men," he said, voice carrying over the waves, "fought us. They lost. By the code, their lives are ours to claim. But we are not kings, nor are we priests. We are wolves of the sea, and a wolf does not waste meat." He looked over the trembling captives. "Those who will join us live. Those who refuse, the sea will take." Silence followed, broken only by the cry of gulls. At last, one of the younger prisoners, a boy no older than Matthew himself, stepped forward. His voice shook, but he said, "I'll join." The crew roared approval, some clapping him on the back as his chains were struck off. Others followed, slowly, reluctantly, but not all. The bearded man who had cursed them spat once more and shook his head. "Better the sea than your filth." Crow gave a single nod. Two men seized the prisoner, dragged him to the rail. He fought, cursed, kicked, but he was no match. With one heave, they cast him into the waves. For a moment his head bobbed above the surface, his arms thrashing. Then the sea swallowed him. Indifferent as ever, Matthew turned away, bile burning his throat. Yet no one else seemed shaken. The men cheered as if another danger had been cut away like rot from meat. Life on board continued. The new recruits were tested harshly. Some faltered, some proved themselves with desperate speed. Matthew watched them and wondered which fate was worse, to drown free, or to live chained to Crow's lot. Stories of the prisoners became part of the ship's memory. Told at night with rum in hand, "Remember the Dutchman who cursed the captain. He feeds the fish now." Men laughed, though the laughter carried an edge, as if reminding themselves it had been his neck, not theirs. Days blurred into nights, marked by the rhythm of waves, the creak of wood, the endless toil of rope and sail. Yet Matthew could not forget. The prisoner's defiant eyes followed him in dreams, mixing with the storm's roar and the screams of the dead. And so he learned another truth of pirate life. It was not only storms or battles that haunted men, but the weight of choices, the echo of voices silenced, the knowledge that freedom was built upon bones. Weeks passed, and the ocean once more became both jailer and sanctuary. The Mercy's fortune sailed restless waters, her patched sail straining against. At last, Crow gave the order to board. Grappling hooks flew, ropes tightened, and once more Matthew found himself swept across a deck slick with blood. He fought blindly, his blade striking wood, flesh, anything that moved close. Around him pirates fell. Spaniards screamed, smoke choked the sky. It was Elias who saved him. A soldier's sword swung toward Matthew's neck, and Elias stepped in, parrying with strength born of rage. He grinned, teeth red with blood, and shoved Matthew aside. "Keep your head, boy. The sea don't want it yet." When the galleon finally broke, her flag torn down, her captain slain, the pirates erupted into wild, terrible joy. The hold was thrown open, and inside lay crates upon crates of silver coin, goblets of gold, crucifixes heavy with jewels. For a moment even Crow himself allowed a thin smile. But gold, Matthew soon learned, was both blessing and curse. The spoils were vast, more than many had ever dreamed. The articles decreed fair division, yet greed is a sickness sharper than hunger. Whispers began. Some claimed the quartermaster had skimmed extra shares. Others muttered that Crow himself would take more than his due. Suspicion spread like rot through timber. One night, Matthew woke to shouting. On the deck, two men clashed with knives, their quarrel over a handful of coins. Blood stained the planks before the fight was broken. The captain ordered both flogged, their backs striped until they lay moaning. "Let gold not blind you," Crow warned. But Matthew saw the way men glanced at one another now. Their hands straying closer to blades even at meals. The true fracture came days later. Briggs, loud, brash, always hungry for glory, was caught whispering in corners, speaking of dividing the treasure and slipping away to some hidden port. Crow's spies heard him. At dawn, the crew was summoned. Briggs stood bound at the mast, his face pale for once, though his eyes still burned defiance. Crow spoke slowly, his words cold as the sea. This man would steal from you. He would break the articles and break your trust. He would take your blood's price and flee. The sentence was marooning. A barren isle awaited, a pistol, and one shot. Briggs cursed, spat, swore he would return to haunt them. The men jeered, though some looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes. When the boat was lowered, Briggs climbed in without stumbling, his jaw set. He raised a fist as they rowed him ashore. Better free alone than slave among thieves. He cried. The pirates laughed, but uneasily, for each man knew that tomorrow, the same fate could be his. When at last the Mercy's fortune limped into a hidden cove, heavy with spoils, the men rushed ashore as though escaping the sea's chains. The port town was little more than a scatter of huts and taverns, but to the pirates it was paradise. Rum flowed, dice clattered, women laughed. Men spent their silver faster than they had shed blood to earn it. Matthew walked among them in wonder and in unease. He saw a gunner squander his share on a single night of drink and collapse in the mud. He saw Ibrahim trade a coin for a loaf of bread, clutching it with tears in his eyes as if it were treasure itself. Elias found a woman, old but kind, and pressed silver into her hands just for a song. And Crow, he sat alone in the tavern's corner, untouched by drink, untouched by mirth, his scar catching the lamplight. He watched his men spin, laugh, fall, and fight, and his expression never changed. Matthew understood then. The captain was not chasing gold, nor drink, nor comfort. He was chasing the sea itself. And as long as the sea called, men like Crow would follow, dragging boys like Matthew with them, deeper and deeper, until neither land nor heaven could claim them again. The hidden port lay in a crooked crescent of jungle and sand, a place no map of king or empire dared record. To the men of the Mercy's fortune, it was a second home, though it was built on ruin and lawlessness. Shacks of driftwood leaned drunkenly against each other. Taverns with sagging roofs spilled music and shouting into the night, and the air smelled of salt, smoke, and sweat. Here, coin was life, and life was cheap. Men staggered drunk through muddy lanes, their boots sinking into ruts filled with rain and rum. Women laughed at the doorways, their arms heavy with bracelets, their eyes sharper than daggers. Merchants hawked stolen wares, bolts of silk, muskets with their crests filed off, pearls glimmering like stolen stars. Everything here bore the mark of theft, and everything had a price. For the crew, weeks at sea dissolved in a frenzy of indulgence. The youngest gunners threw their silver on dice tables, swearing they could turn 10 coins into 100. Within hours they were broke, their laughter turned to groans. Yet they still begged for another throw. Old Elias spent his share more wisely. He bought boots that did not leak, tobacco wrapped in paper, and a small carved whistle he said would keep storms away. A man needs luck more than gold, he told Matthew, though his eyes betrayed the hollowness of the claim. Ibrahim, with his boy's face and calloused hands, walked into the market and bought bread. Just bread, soft, warm, fresh from a clay oven. He carried it to the beach and ate each piece slowly, tears slipping down his cheeks. My mother used to bake like this, he whispered. Before the dead men came, Matthew sat with him, saying nothing, for words seemed weak against the ghost that bread carried. Yet for others, the port was a spiral into madness. One gunner, Hart, lost his entire share to dice within a single night. Desperate, he sold his pistol, then his boots, then even the silver buttons off his coat. By dawn, he staggered barefoot, swearing he would kill the man who had cheated him. By evening he was found floating in the harbor, his throat cut. No one asked who had done it. In a place without law, death was just another trade. The captain remained apart. Crow spent little, drank nothing, spoke less. He met with a handful of other captains in shadow tavern rooms, their voices hushed, their eyes hard. Matthew caught only fragments, Navy patrols, blockade in the Indies, a fleet gathering in Havana. He realized then that Crow's mind was never in the port at all, even surrounded by laughter and vice. The captain was already listening to the sea, already planning the next raid. the next storm, the next kill. But even a wolf pack may tear itself apart when the kill is too rich. The galleon's gold lingered in the men's veins like poison. Some argued the shares had been unfair. Others whispered of keeping more for themselves, of leaving Crow behind. One evening, voices rose in the tavern, to pirates snarling at each other over who had earned more blood. Tankards shattered, knives flashed, and by the time it ended, 3 men lay bleeding in the mud. The next morning, Crow gathered the crew. His voice was calm, but his score caught the light like fire. "You think gold is freedom," he said, "but gold is chains. You spend it, you bleed for it, you die for it. The only freedom is the sea and the articles that keep us alive upon it. Forget this, and you'll feed the gulls before another moon." Some men bowed their heads, shamed. Others muttered, their hunger not sated. Matthew saw it. The crew was no longer one brotherhood. The storm had cracked them, the gold had rotted them, and only Crow's shadow held them together. Their return to sea came not with fanfare but with unease. The Fortune sailed heavy with new supplies, barrels of rum, and the memory of the port's chaos. Yet whispers lingered. Briggs's ghost, marooned on his lonely isle, seemed to sail with them, his curse echoing, "Better free alone than slave among." Matthew swallowed. "Isn't it?" Crow's scar deepened as he almost smiled. "The sea is honest. She takes what she will. No promises, no lies. It is men who are cruel, boy. Men who betray, who steal, who waste what the sea gives them. Learn that, and you may yet survive." Then he walked away, his coat whipping in the wind. Matthew stood alone, the captain's words echoing louder than the waves. Perhaps Crow was right. Perhaps the sea was not the enemy. Perhaps the true enemy was within the crew itself, in the greed, the hunger, the shadows in every man's heart. And as the Mercy's fortune sailed into the rising sun, Matthew knew another trial awaited. The sea never gave peace for long. The weeks that followed blurred together in salt and suffering. The Mercy's fortune drifted farther into the Caribbean. Her sails patched more times than anyone could count. Her crew thinned not just by illness, but by silence. Men spoke less, laughed less, and when they did, it was sharp and brittle. The sound of nerves stretched too far. Even the sea itself seemed to hush, as though waiting for something to happen. It began with a sail on the horizon. At first, it was nothing unusual. Sailors pointed often to white specks at sea, guessing merchantmen or traders. Sometimes ships that vanished before the night was out, but this sail lingered. For days, it haunted their wake, never close enough to reveal its flags, never far enough to be forgotten. Crow watched it with the patience of a hawk. His eyes never left the horizon, though he said little. When Matthew asked what it was, the captain only replied, "A shadow." And shadows mean hunters, the crew whispered nervously. Tales spread fast of naval patrols from England, of Spanish armadas sworn to crush piracy, of privateers who hunted pirates for gold and glory. Every man knew that one mistake, one torn sail, one storm at the wrong hour, and the ship behind them would close the gap. It was Briggs who haunted Matthew most in those nights. He remembered the man's defiance, the fist raised against the brotherhood that abandoned him. Now, as the shadowed ship trailed them, Matthew wondered if Briggs had been right all along. Freedom among thieves was no freedom at all, only another set of chains. Rattling louder when danger closed in, the Fortune pressed on. The crew trimmed sails, pumped bilges, scrubbed decks, all with nervous haste. Marta muttered prayers under her breath as she stitched torn cloth, charms dangling from her wrists. Elias chewed tobacco harder than ever, spitting dark streams onto the deck, muttering that the sea had a long memory and never forgave. 3 nights later, thunder rolled not from the clouds, but from cannon. The shadow had revealed itself. At dawn, the crew saw her, a frigate, sharp of hull, bristling with guns, her sails taut and clean as a sword's edge. And upon her mast flew a flag the pirates knew to well, the Union Jack, bright against the morning sun. "She's Navy," muttered Gray, "and she's been set for us." The crew bristled with panic. Some begged to flee into shallower waters where the frigate's draft might betray her. Others swore they should fight, for what did pirates have to lose but chains and gallows? Crow silenced them with a glance. His scar seemed to burn as he spoke. We do not run like rabbits, nor do we rush like fools. We sail as wolves, every man to his station. The battle that followed was no clash of equals. The Navy frigate carried more guns, more men, and the iron discipline of empire. The Fortune carried desperation. The first broadside ripped across her stern, splintering wood, sending 2 men shrieking into the sea. The second broadside smashed the mainmast rigging, and the ship shuddered as though the sea itself had bitten her. Matthew worked the guns, his arms raw with powder burns, his throat raw from smoke. Around him, men screamed, blood sprayed, and still Crow's voice rang out, calm, commanding, a steel thread binding chaos. Steady, damn true. Make every shot count. They did not win. No pirate ship ever truly won against the Navy. But they endured. Cannonballs tore through planks, but the Fortune's guns barked back. Twice, the frigate reeled under lucky shots that punched holes in her hull. Twice, cheer rose from the crew, only to die when the frigate steadied and returned fire. By dusk, the sea was littered with debris, floating spars, torn sails, bodies bobbing face down. Smoke coiled into the clouds, and the cries of the wounded carried across the waves. The frigate pulled away, battered, but unbroken, unwilling to lose more men in the fading light. For now, the Fortune had survived. But survival was not victory. The ship was crippled, her timbers cracked, her crew broken. The wounded groaned below deck, where Gray worked with his saw until his arms shook. The smell of blood mingled with tar, a perfume of war. Matthew sat against a cannon, too tired to move, watching stars blink into the sky one by one. Crow stood at the bow, his coat torn, his face blackened with soot. He did not smile, did not curse, did not speak. Only his eyes burned. The eyes of a man who knew the hunt was not over. The frigate would return. Others would come. The sea was closing its jaws around them. And Matthew understood, for the first time, the truth that had haunted every whispered story in every tavern. Piracy was not freedom, but a race against the gallows. Every sunrise a reprieve, every sunset a warning. The noose waited on shore. The cannon waited at sea, and between them lay only men like Crow, too stubborn or too damned to stop running. The Fortune limped through the waves like a wounded beast. Her sails sagged in tatters, her hull scarred with black powder burns, her deck slick with the blood of men who would never rise again. For days she crept southward, away from the hunting frigate, until land broke the horizon. A narrow island, half buried in mist, its trees bending like old beggars in the wind. Crow gave the order without ceremony. Beach her there. We mend or we rot. The crew obeyed, too weary to argue. The Fortune scraped across a shoal, grinding against coral before settling into a shallow bay. Men dropped anchor with trembling arms. The sound of change rattling was not triumph but exhaustion. They had escaped for now. The island was no paradise. The sand was coarse, the jungle thick and dark. Smoke curled from volcanic ridges inland, staining the sky with gray. Birds cried from the canopy, their voices harsh, mocking. Yet to the crew, it was sanctuary, solid ground, fresh water, a reprieve from the endless chase of the sea. They set to work. Fires burned along the shore as carpenters hammered at broken planks. Nets were cast into shallows, hauling up silver fish that hissed when thrown into coals. Marta gathered herbs from the undergrowth, whispering charms as she crushed them into poultices for the wounded. Elias, his hands shaking, mended sails with clumsy stitches, muttering that the sea would remember their crime if they stayed too long. At night, the island was not silent. Frogs croaked, insects droned, and the jungle whispered with movements unseen. Men told stories around the fire, voices low, eyes darting at shadows. Heart's ghost was said to wander the tree line, barefoot and bleeding, forever cursing the dice that had ruined him. Some swore they saw lights deep among the trees, lanterns that swayed without hands to hold them. Gray dismissed it as swamp gas, but few dared explore. Matthew found himself listening most to Ibrahim, who sat apart, carving shapes into driftwood with a sailor's knife. One evening, Ibrahim handed him a figure of a bird with wings spread wide. "Where I come from," he said softly, "this bird is freedom. It flies beyond nets, beyond ropes. My father carved one for me before they took our house. I carve them now to remember." Matthew held the carving, feeling its rough wings against his palm. He wondered if freedom was real. On the 14th night, the silence broke. A shout rose from the beach. Sails had appeared on the horizon to this time, black against the moonlight. Not the frigate they had fought, but others, drawn by the same hunt. The wolves had tasted blood, and now the pack was gathering. The men froze. Their laughter died in their throats. Crow's voice cut the night like a blade. Back to the ship. At once, the island is ashes. The sea is our only road. And so, before dawn, they pushed the Fortune back into the waves. She groaned, half mended, but she floated. Oars splashed, sails caught the wind, and once more the pirates fled into the dark, carrying with them not treasure, not triumph, but the memory of an island that had given them nothing but time, and the knowledge that time was running out. The Fortune sailed into the night with the desperation of a beast fleeing the hounds. Her patched sail strained against the wind, her hull groaned with every wave. But she moved. Behind her, the two ships loomed on the horizon, black teeth against a pale moon. They did not hurry. They did not need to. Like wolves driving wounded prey, they only followed, knowing time would finish what cannon had begun. For 3 days and nights the chase went on. The sea itself seemed to conspire against the pirates. The wind shifted unpredictably, first to strong, then falling dead so that the sails hung limp and useless. In those hours the Fortune drifted, every man staring back at the hunters creeping closer, closer. When wind returned, it carried storms, lashing rain and towering waves that battered the wounded vessel to its bones. The crew lived in a state of half-waking terror. Every sound became threat, the snap of rope, the creak of timber, the sudden call from the masthead. Men argued over rations, fought over buckets of water, snarled like animals at the smallest slight. Gray the surgeon had no herbs left, no rum to numb the wounded, only his saw and a weary hand. Marta's charms felt thin against the endless horizon. Her whispered prayers drowned by the crash of waves. Matthew moved through it all like a ghost. He felt the hunger gnawing at him, the salt stinging his cracked lips, the weight of despair pressing heavier than the sea. He listened to the older sailors, their stories no longer of gold or triumph, but of gallows avoided, of comrades hanged in ports with names that sounded like curses. Elias confessed once, in the dark, that he had buried 3 sons before he ever went to sea. The land killed them slower than the sea ever could, he said bitterly. At least here, the end comes with salt and wind. The pursuit wore away not only their bodies but their spirits. Each sunrise was met not with hope but with dread, for daylight revealed how much closer the hunters had crept. Each sunset was worse, for night carried no rest, only the fear of lanterns suddenly appearing out of the dark. On the 5th day, one of the pursuing ships loosed a shot. The ball fell short, splashing harmlessly into the waves, but its message was clear. "We are here. We are waiting. You cannot outrun us." Crow stood at the wheel, silent as stone. He did not curse, did not rage. He only steered, his scar stark in the gray light. At last he spoke, voice flat as iron. "They heard us. They mean to wear us thin, break us before they strike." The men muttered angrily. Some wanted to turn and fight, to meet death with blades bared. Others whispered of surrender, hoping for mercy from a noose that had none. Matthew watched Crow closely. The captain's eyes burned with a calculation no one else could see. That night, Crow gathered his officers around a lantern. His voice was low, carrying more weight than a broadside. "They want us tired, desperate. That is their strength. So we give them what they expect and break it. His plan was madness, yet it was the only plan. They would lure one of the hunters close, feign weakness, let the Navy taste victory. Then, in the moment of overconfidence, the Fortune would turn with all her remaining strength, deliver one savage blow, and vanish into night. The crew listened in silence. Some crossed themselves, others spat in contempt of death. But when Crow's eyes met theirs, hard and unyielding, none spoke against him. For in a world where death was certain, the only choice was how a man met it. The next day the act began. The Fortune slowed her sails, staggered her course. Men slumped visibly on deck, groaning loud enough for the wind to carry. From afar it must have looked as though the ship was finished, prey too weak to run. By dusk the trap was sprung. One of the hunters broke formation, eager for an easy kill. She drew closer, her cannon mouths yawning wide, her deck bristling with Marines ready to board. Matthew's heart pounded so hard he thought it might split his ribs. He saw the whites of their eyes, the gleam of their bayonets in the setting sun. Then Crow's voice cut through the storm of fear. Now, show them the teeth of wolves. The Fortune heeled sharply, sails snapping full. Her broadside roared, fire and iron vomiting into the Navy ship at near point blank. What exploded, men screamed, smoke rolled across the sea. The hunter staggered, crippled in a single brutal strike, cut the lanterns. Hard to starboard, Crow bellowed died in the chaos. The Fortune slipped into darkness. Waves swallowed her trail, smoke cloaked her flight. The second ship fired wildly into the night, but hit nothing but sea for the first time in days. Silence returned. No cannon, no cries, only the ragged breath of men who had defied death one more time. Matthew sank to the deck, his whole body trembling. Around him, men laughed and wept in equal measure, their relief as sharp as madness. Crow stood tall, his coat torn, his face black with soot, and though he said nothing, his presence alone was victory. Yet Matthew knew, deep in his bones, that this was no ending. They had won a reprieve, nothing more. The hunters would return. The sea had no end, and neither did the chase. The Fortune drifted into the safety of a hidden lagoon just before dawn. The sea outside had turned cruel, white teeth of waves gnashing at her battered hull. But here the waters were calm, shielded by jagged cliffs and tangled mangroves that reached into the tide like skeletal hands. To any ship passing in the open sea, the lagoon was invisible, its entrance a narrow slit of rock barely wide enough for a single mast. Crow had known of it, though he never said how. Perhaps he had been here before. Perhaps he simply knew the sea's secrets the way wolves know their forests. When the anchor chains rattled, the sound carried like a sigh of relief through the crew. Men slumped on deck, some crossing themselves, some simply staring at the cliffs as if they were guardians. The hunt had been shaken off for now, but no one believed it was over. The lagoon was a world unto itself. Thick jungle pressed close, filled with the calls of unseen animals. Vines hung low, heavy with flowers that smelled sweet but sickly. The water, though calm, was dark, reflecting the cliffs like black glass. To Matthew, it felt less a refuge than a graveyard waiting to be filled. Work began at once. The ship was half crippled from the chase. Planks had to be replaced, sails mended again, barrels refilled with fresh water. Men hacked into the jungle to find food, returning with strange fruits and meat of animals Matthew could not name. Marta boiled herbs in great pots, her chants rising above the hiss of the fire. Gray, his saw forever wet, labored in the hold, where the wounded moaned through clenched teeth. It was here that the crew's nerves began to unravel. With no horizon to chase, no sails to pursue, they had only themselves and their memories. And memories, for pirates, were heavier than chains. Elias grew restless. He smoked his tobacco until nothing was left but ash and chewed the stems like a starving man. At night, he ranted of the sons he had buried, his voice breaking, until someone pressed rum to his lips just to silence him. One evening, he stood at the edge of the lagoon, staring into the black water. "I hear them down there," he muttered, All the ones the sea has taken. They call my name. Matthew pulled him back, but Elias's eyes never left the water, as though his sons waited beneath the surface. Ibrahim kept to himself, carving more birds from driftwood, each one more fragile than the last. He gave them away to anyone who asked, but kept one for himself, tied to a string around his neck. Matthew saw him stroke it when he thought no one was watching, his lips moving in silent prayers. Others turned to anger. Fights broke out over shares of food, over hammocks, over nothing at all. Knives flashed in the dark, and twice men had to be dragged bleeding to gray. Crow punished no one. He let the crew's rage burn itself out, his silence heavier than any lash. And then came the whispers. Some men said the lagoon was cursed. They claimed they saw shadows moving beneath the black water, shapes too large for fish, too slow for dolphins. Others swore that at night figures stood on the cliffs, tall and unmoving, watching. Marta warned them to hold their tongues, for words had power. But even she seemed uneasy. One night, as the moon hung red above the cliffs, Matthew awoke to shouting. A man had vanished from his hammock. They searched the ship, the beach, the jungle's edge, nothing. Only his knife lay by the water's edge, its blade broken. Some swore they heard a splash in the night. Some swore they heard laughter. Fear spread like rot. Men slept with weapons in hand, though none knew against what. The lagoon, once a hiding place, became a prison. The cliffs loomed higher each day, the water darker, the jungle thicker. The men looked at Crow for answers, but the captain gave none. His scar caught the moonlight, his silence sharper than steel. It was Matthew who finally asked him, "Why here, Captain? Why this place?" Crow's gaze never left the horizon, hidden though it was, because the sea has no mercy, he said, and neither does the land. Here, at least, we vanish. Sometimes survival means being forgotten. Matthew felt the weight of those words long after. To be forgotten, was that freedom or another kind of death? 2 weeks passed, and the lagoon gave them no rest. Supplies ran thin, tempers ran thinner. The men were not wolves here. They were rats in a cage. When the cry finally came from the masthead sails on the horizon again, many did not even curse. They only sighed, as if relief had come at last. For the chase had returned, and at least the chase was life. Crow gave the order at dawn. We leave. The lagoon is shadows. The sea is truth. And so the Fortune slipped once more into open waters, scarred but alive. Her crew more fractured than ever. Behind them the lagoon closed like a wound, and Matthew knew they had left something they're not treasure, not friends, but pieces of themselves that would never be whole again. Fortune slipped back into open waters, leaving behind the cursed lagoon. But no man on board felt lighter for it. The sea stretched endless in every direction, gray and merciless, and though the horizon was wide, it felt like a prison wall closing in. They had escaped hunters before, but everyone knew the chase could not be outrun forever. Time, like the tide, was against them. Days bled into one another. Food grew scarce again. The pigs roasted on the island were already forgotten, their bones picked clean and thrown to the sea. The fruits had spoiled. The barrels of fresh water were nearly drained. Rations were cut, 1 biscuit per man, a swallow of rum, a ladle of broth so thin it might as well have been seawater. Hunger became not just a pain, but a madness. Matthew felt it in the way men looked at one another. Their eyes lingered too long on shoulders, on arms, on flesh. He remembered the whispers he had once heard in port taverns of ships driven to cannibalism, when storms starved them, of captains who ordered lots to be drawn. One man sacrificed so the others might live. He had thought them tales told to frighten children. Now, watching the hollow faces around him, he was not so sure. Elias was the first to crack. One evening, he stood in the middle of the deck, shouting at Crow, his eyes wild, his voice breaking. "You call yourself captain, but you starve us. You keep the best for yourself. I've seen it." Crow did not answer. He only stood, still as stone, his scar a pale line in the moonlight. Elias's voice rose higher, his spit flying. You'll kill us all. Better to drown than waste away under your command. Some men nodded, muttering in agreement. Others turned their faces away, unwilling to be seen. It was Marta who finally stepped forward, her hands raised. Enough, Elias, she said softly. You bury us all with such words. But Elias spat at her feet. Better buried than eaten. The silence that followed was worse than any storm. Crow at last spoke, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the ship. You think I keep more for myself. Search my cabin. Find what you will. But remember this without order. Without the articles, you are not brothers. You are prey. And the sea devours prey. No one moved. No one searched. Elias slumped back into the shadows, his madness swallowed by the greater fear of the man they called captain. But the doubt remained, festering like rot in the beams. The night Matthew could not sleep. He lay in his hammock listening to the groans of hunger, the muttered curses, the rasp of knives being sharpened. In his dreams he saw Elias's sons calling from beneath the black water, their hands pale and skeletal. He woke sweating, his stomach hollow, his throat raw with thirst. The days grew worse. Men fainted at their posts, their arms too weak to haul ropes. Gray the surgeon had nothing left but cloth to bind wounds and salt to clean them. He whispered once to Matthew, his face gaunt, I've seen ships eat themselves, lad. Pray this one dies quicker. And then the betrayal came. It began as whispers, spread as secrets, and burst into violence one night when stars were hidden by cloud. A group of men rose against Crow, their knives glinting in the dark. They had had enough of hunger, enough of fear. They meant to take the fortune for themselves, to sail for the nearest port and throw themselves on the mercy of kings. The fight was chaos. Shouts, steel, blood. Matthew woke to the clash of blades, the thud of bodies. He grabbed an oar and swung wildly, striking a man he barely recognized in the dim light. The deck was slick with blood, torches guttering in the wind. Marta screamed prayers, her voice drowned by curses. Through it all, Crow moved like a storm-given flesh. He fought without hesitation, his cutlass a flash of fire in the dark. Men fell before him, their rebellion crushed not by numbers but by the sheer inevitability of his will. His scar shone like lightning as he struck, his coat torn, his voice unyielding. You call yourselves wolves, then bite, and be broken. When it ended, 3 mutineers lay dead, 2 more bound and bleeding. The rest slunk back into the shadows, their courage spent. Crow stood in the center of the deck, chest heaving, blood dripping from his blade. He did not look at his men. He looked at the sea, black and endless. Matthew watched him, trembling. He had seen mutinies in stories, always with clear sides, with justice or mercy to end them. But here there was none. Only hunger, only desperation. Only the slow collapse of men who had gambled their souls for freedom and found chains heavier than they had left behind. The next morning, the bodies were thrown overboard. The sea swallowed them without a ripple. The crew ate in silence, chewing their hardtack like ash. No one spoke of the rebellion. No one dared. But Matthew knew it was not finished. Hunger still gnawed, and betrayal, once tasted, never left a man's mouth. And so the Fortune sailed on, her sails patched, her crew broken, her shadow lengthening across the sea. Each day the horizon offered no salvation, only more water, more hunger, more silence. And Matthew, staring into the waves, wondered if freedom was worth the price or if, perhaps, Briggs had found the truest escape when he raised his fist and chose exile. The sea had been too calm, too silent for too long. Old sailors knew such silence never lasted. When the air turned heavy, when gulls vanished and the water grew smooth as glass, it meant the storm was already coming. Not a squall, not a drizzle, but a tempest. The kind that tore masts from their roots and left ships splintered bones on the waves. The Fortune felt it first in her timbers. She shuddered, creaked, as though even her wooden soul knew the sky was about to split open. Men moved with the restless urgency of prey that senses the predator near. They tied ropes, checked knots, fastened barrels, and crossed themselves when they thought no one was looking. By dusk the first one came. It was not gentle. It slammed into the sails like the fist of God, tearing canvas and whipping ropes. The sea rose, mountains of water heaving, and lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled across the deck like cannon fire. Rain fell in sheets so heavy it blinded the men, reduced them to shadows in a white blur of fury. Crow stood at the helm, his coat plastered to his skin, his hair whipping in the gale. He did not shout orders. He roared them, his voice cutting through the storm like steel. Reef that sail. Lash the guns. Hold the wheel or the sea will take it. Men scrambled, their bodies tossed like toys by the waves. Matthew hauled on a rope until his palms bled, salt mixing with blood. Teeth clenched as the sea tried to tear him into its maw. He saw Elias clutching the mast, eyes wide, screaming prayers into the thunder. Ibrahim clung to the bird carving at his neck, whispering words no one else could hear. Marta lashed herself to the galley post and sang louder than the storm, her voice a desperate spell against the void. The night lasted an eternity. Waves slammed over the deck, sweeping away barrels, crates, even men who could not hold fast enough. One gunner was there one moment, gone the next, swallowed by a black wall of water. No one had the strength to cry out for him. Matthew fought beside Crow at the wheel. The captain's hands were iron, refusing to let go, though the wheel bucked and twisted like a beast possessed. His scar glowed white with each flash of lightning. You think this storm wants us dead, boy? Crow bellowed. It doesn't care. The sea never cares. It takes, and it gives nothing. Matthew spat rain from his mouth, clinging to the ropes. Then why fight it? Crow's teeth shone in the lightning, a grimace or a smile. Because that's all men can do. The ship groaned, her mast cracking, sails ripping into tatters. The storm clawed at her with hands of wind and water. But still she floated. Still she fought, hours blurred. Time lost meaning. There was only the storm, and the men who defied it. Matthew remembered moments in fragments, Gray binding a wound with his teeth when his hand slipped. Elias laughing hysterically as he lashed a cannon that tried to roll free. Marta's voice, raw and ragged, singing until she collapsed in exhaustion. And then, at last, a silence. Not calm, never calm, but a pause. The storm's eye. The sea lay flat, the air eerily still, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Men collapsed where they stood, gasping. Some sobbed, others kissed the deck, others simply stared upward, too broken to move. Matthew sank to his knees, every muscle burning, his lungs on fire. For a moment, he thought they had survived. Then he saw it, the wall. The second half of the storm rose before them, higher than the masts, a living mountain of water crowned in lightning. It roared as it came, a voice older than time. Men screamed, prayed, cursed. Crow stood tall at the helm, his scar gleaming. On your feet, he roared. If we go down standing. The wave crashed. The fortune vanished beneath the sea. When dawn finally came, it was no dawn at all. The sun rose hidden behind a veil of cloud, its light gray and weak, as if even the heavens pitied no man on the sea. The fortune floated no longer a proud predator of the waves, but a crippled carcass. Her mast snapped, her rigging torn to shreds, her deck split by wounds of water and lightning. She was alive, yes, but like a soldier staggering from battle with one arm gone and blood in his eyes. The storm had taken its prize. Half the crew was gone. Some had been swept into the deep, their cries lost in the thunder. Others had broken on the deck, their skulls cracked by barrels or spars ripped free. And some those no one dared name had simply vanished, swallowed whole by the sea as though they had never been. Matthew moved among the survivors like a man in a dream. He could scarcely feel his own body. Every limb ached, every muscle screamed. His eyes burned with salt. Around him men sat slumped against the rail or sprawled flat upon the planks, too weak even to curse, Gray worked without pause. His surgeon saw rust red with blood. He cut, sewed, wrapped, bound his face white with exhaustion, his clothes stiff with gore. One sailor whimpered as Gray removed his leg, and when it was done, he did not whimper anymore. Elias staggered about the deck, his laugh cracked, his words a stream of madness. The sea took them. The sea took them all, and it will take us too. He clutched his wooden charm so tightly his fingers bled. Marta moved like a shadow among the wounded. She knelt by each man, whispering prayers, sprinkling drops of precious water onto parched lips. Her voice was hoarse, but still it soothed, though none believed it could bring true salvation. And Crow stood at the prow, his coat in tatters, his face marked with soot and blood. He had not moved since the storm ended. He stared at the horizon, at the endless wall of gray sea and sky. Some said he saw nothing. Others whispered he was watching death itself, standing just out of reach, waiting. Matthew found himself staring too. His mind replayed the faces of those lost, the gunner who vanished in the wave, the boy of 15 who had been crushed by a spar, the nameless men swept overboard. He saw them in every ripple of the water, their eyes open, their mouths gasping, their hands reaching. Night came, and with it came ghosts, not spirits of smoke or shadow, but dreams so vivid they may as well have been real. Men saw the faces of wives long dead, of children they had abandoned, of shipmates who should not have been standing in the dark. One man swore he heard his brother calling from beneath the deck. Another leapt into the sea, claiming he saw a light below the waves. They never found him. Matthew too was haunted. He dreamed of Briggs, the man who had once raised his fist against the Brotherhood. In the dream, Briggs stood on the broken mast, his eyes burning with fire. "I told you," he said, his voice like wind through a graveyard. "Freedom is not here. Freedom is not at sea." And then he vanished, leaving Matthew clutching nothing but the salt air. The hunger returned, crueler than ever. With stores ruined by salt water and barrels shattered, there was barely enough food for a week. Each meal was a scrap, a fragment of biscuit softened in brine. Men chewed slowly, their eyes hollow, as though every bite cost more than it gave. It was then that the whispers began again. Mutiny, sacrifice, the dark words no sailor dared say aloud, but all thought in silence. They spoke of drawing lots, of feeding the strong with the weak. They spoke of Crow, and whether he was still fit to lead, or whether his mind had already sunk beneath the storm. Matthew could not say what held the crew together than fear, loyalty, or simple weakness. Perhaps all three. But the ship drifted on, broken, bleeding, yet afloat. The Fortune was no longer a ship of wolves, but of ghosts who walked, ghosts who wept, ghosts who waited for the sea to claim them. For days the Fortune drifted like a corpse on the sea, half alive, half dead. Her sails hung in tatters, her timbers groaned with every swell. And her crew, what remained of them, were shadows more than men. Hunger gnawed at their bellies like rats trapped inside their bones. Thirst burned their throats until every word was a rasp. Some prayed, some cursed, some sat in silence with eyes to hollow to see. Matthew counted the days by the rise and fall of the sun, but even that became meaningless. Was it 5 days since the storm? 10? He could not be sure. Time dissolved into a blur of suffering. He had no strength to write, no parchment left even if he had. Only the memory of faces lost and the constant ache of hunger. Then one morning, Elias screamed from the masthead. It was not his usual cry of madness, but something sharp, desperate, alive. Land, land. The crew stirred like corpses roused by a trumpet. Men staggered to the rails, blinking against the glare of the sea. And there, faint, low on the horizon, a smear of green rose above the endless gray water. An island. Hope returned like fire to cold ashes. Men wept, laughed, fell to their knees. Some kissed the deck, others kissed Marta's hands. Even Crow stirred from his statue-like vigil, his scar twisting as his lips parted. "Steer for it," he said, and though his voice was a whisper, it carried more power than any shout. The Fortune limped toward the island on broken wings. The men worked with the strength of the desperate, patching what sails they could. Rowing with oars lashed from wreckage, every moment brought the green smear closer until it was no longer a smear, but a true coast. A line of jungle, cliffs, and a pale beach-like bone. But as they neared, unease grew. The island looked wrong. The jungle trees were twisted, their branches curling like claws. No birds wheeled in the air. No smoke rose from hearths. The beach was littered not with driftwood, but with bones. Too many bones, bleached and broken. Half buried in the sand, Elias muttered prayers under his breath. Gray spat into the sea. Marta clutched her cross tighter. Yet hunger is stronger than fear, and the Fortune crept onward. They made landfall at dusk. The sand crunched beneath their boots, dry and sharp as if it were ground shell. The jungle loomed silent, its leaves unmoving though no one stirred. Men spread out in small groups, searching for food, water, shelter. Matthew, Marta, and Elias stumbled upon a spring, its water dark but flowing. They drank greedily, too parched to question its taste. But night changed everything. The jungle came alive with sounds no man could name. Screeches, wails, low moans that seemed neither beast nor bird. The men huddled by fires, eyes wide, blades ready. Elias swore he saw figures in the trees, thin, pale shapes that moved quickly, vanishing when looked at directly. Gray dismissed it as madness, yet he just sat with his back to the flames, knife in hand. Matthew could not sleep. He watched the dark line of the jungle and felt it watching back. He thought of the bones on the beach and wondered how many ships before them had found this place, and how many had never left. At dawn, they found proof. Near the far side of the beach lay the wreck of another ship, half buried in sand. Its hull was cracked, its timbers gnawed by sea and time. Inside they found rusted swords, shattered crates, and the remains of men. Some were chained to the deck, their bones twisted in agony. Others lay in piles, gnawed clean. A silence fell over the crew as they looked upon the ruin. Marta crossed herself. Gray whispered, "This place eats men." Crow, however, did not turn away. He stepped into the wreck, his boots crunching bone, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Then we eat it first," he said. His voice was calm, but in it was something darker. A promise or a curse. For days they lived upon that island. They hunted crabs, gathered fruit, patched the Fortune with wood from the wreck. Their strength returned, their cheeks filled again, and for a moment, hope dared to breathe. But the island did not let them forget. Men vanished into the jungle, never to return. One by one, their hammocks lay empty. Elias swore the trees whispered at night, calling their names. Marta dreamt of hands reaching from the earth to drag her under. Gray grew goner, muttering about diseases that festered in strange soil. And Matthew began to dream of the sea itself. Walking on land, a great wave in the shape of a man, its eyes hollow, its voice the sound of drowning. It whispered of freedom, but freedom bought in blood. By the time they set sail again, the Fortune repaired but scarred. The crew was smaller still. The island had fed them, but it had also taken its due. Men spoke of it only as the place that should not be, and when its green shape vanished over the horizon, none looked back. Yet Matthew carried it in his mind, the silence of its jungle, the bones on its shore, and the feeling that the sea had given them land not as mercy, but as warning. The Fortune crept back onto the open sea, patched with bones and nightmares. Her crew thinner and quieter than ever. Every man carried the island with him, the whispers in the trees, the bones in the sand, the sense that the world itself wanted them gone. They had eaten, they had drunk, they had survived, but no one felt alive. For the first few days, the sea was mercifully calm. The sun rose pale, the nights were starless, and the waves were low and steady. Men moved about the deck like phantoms, performing tasks more from memory than from strength. No songs were sung, no dice thrown. Marta murmured prayers in corners. Elias sat muttering with his talisman, and Gray kept sharpening his knife though there was little left to cut, but his own to spare. Matthew tried to speak with Crow once. The captain stood at the helm, his scar catching the weak light, his eyes on the horizon. "Captain," Matthew said quietly, "where do we go now?" Crow did not turn. His voice was flat, without even the rumble of command. "Where the sea takes us. And if the sea takes us to death." Crow's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then we greeted standing. Those words chilled Matthew more than any storm. The men no longer followed Crow for hope. They followed because they had no strength left to defy him. Then, one morning, the lookout's voice cracked across the water. "Sail ho." At first, the men barely stirred. Another sail on the horizon. What did it matter? But then Elias pointed, his hand trembling. The sails were square, white, sharp as teeth, and on the mast, the Union Jack snapped in the wind. The English had found them again. Crow's face remained unreadable, but his voice rolled out like thunder. "All hands, ready yourselves. The hunt begins." The Fortune was no match, everyone knew it. The frigate was larger, faster, armed with more cannon than the pirates could ever muster. But the sea was wide, and sometimes cunning could outlast strength. For days, the chase began. The Fortune fled, living on her patched sails, her crew rowing when the wind faltered. The frigate followed, relentless, its sails full, its guns glinting like a row of hungry teeth. Each time the distance closed, each dusk it widened again. It was not a battle, but a hunt, a wolf chasing a wounded deer. Men grew restless, hunger clawed. Again, thirst gnawed their throats. Some whispered of surrender, of throwing themselves on the mercy of the crown. Others swore they would rather sink with cutlass in hand. Gray sneered at both, saying the rope cared little. Whether you prayed or cursed one night under a blood-red moon, the Fortune's council gathered. Crow, Matthew, Marta, Gray, and a handful of the strongest. The lantern flickered over hollow faces. "We cannot outrun her forever," Marta said. "Our sails will not last. Our men will not last." Crow's eyes burned in the half-light. "Then we make them bleed. We strike first." Matthew shook his head. "That's madness. They'll crush us." "Maybe," Crow said. "But madness is all we have left. Better a wolf's death than a rat's." The decision was made. The Fortune turned from flight to fury at dawn. The frigate found her prey no longer running but waiting. The pirates had braced their patched guns, sharpened blades, readied grappling hooks. The sea was still, the air heavy, as if the world itself held its breath. The first volley roared like thunder. Cannonballs tore into the Fortune's side. Splinters shredding flesh, men screamed. Blood spattered, the ship shuddered. But she answered. Her own guns, fewer and smaller, barked fire. And by luck or fate, one ball smashed into the frigate's bow, splintering wood and sending men flying. The battle raged all day. Smoke rolled across the waves. Fire licked its sails. The sea churned with debris and corpses. Matthew fought with cutlass in hand, his arms numb, his body bruised. He remembered nothing but flashes, Elias shrieking, with laughter as he slit a man's throat, Marta binding a wound with her bare hands, Gray hacking through ropes with his knife as fire spread, and Crow, always Crow. He moved through battle like a figure carved from the storm, his scar white, his blade red, his voice cut through the smoke. Stand, strike, die with your teeth bared. By dusk, the Fortune was breaking. Her deck was slick with blood, her mast shattered, her gun silent. The frigate loomed above, ready for the final blow. Men dropped their weapons, sank to their knees. Some prayed, some cursed. Crow stood at the helm, his face black with soot, his coat torn. He raised his sword, pointed it at the frigate, and roared, "If they want us, they'll choke on us." Then came the last desperate act. Barrels of powder, dragged from the hold, stacked in the center of the deck. The plan whispered among the men, to ignite them, to take themselves and the enemy in one final blaze. Matthew's heart froze. He saw the spark in Crow's eyes and knew he meant it. He meant to burn the Fortune to ashes, to drag the frigate down into the abyss with her captain. Matthew cried, "This isn't freedom, it's damnation." Crow did not answer. He only lifted the torch. The torch flared in Crow's hand, its flame trembling in the wind but never dying. The men froze, every eye upon him, every breath caught. The barrels of powder stacked on the deck seemed to pulse like hearts, their shadows long and black across the blood-slick planks. Matthew stood a dozen paces away, his cutlass dripping red, his chest heaving. His voice cracked against the storm of battle. "Captain, this isn't victory, it's suicide." Crow's scar twisted as he turned his head, his eyes wild and shining in the smoke. Better ashes than chains. Some men cheered weakly at the words, their voices hollow, desperate. Others wept. Marta pressed herself against the mast, her hands trembling as she clutched her cross. "Crow," she whispered, "God sees you. Don't damn us all." But Crow did not waver. He raised the torch higher, and its light threw monstrous shapes across the deck. The English frigate loomed close, its guns ready, its men shouting, preparing to board. The Fortune was a cornered beast, broken but not yet dead. The crew stood divided. Elias laughed madly, clapping his bloody hands. "Yes, let them choke on us. Let the sea take them all." Gray spat, his knife still in hand. "Chains or fire, it's all the same grave." Matthew alone stepped forward, his knees shaking, his heart hammering. "No," he said, his voice trembling but loud. "There must be another way." Crow turned on him, his eyes narrowing. "Another way? You think mercy waits on that frigate? You think the crown spares wolves? No, boy, there is no mercy. Only the noose." Matthew swallowed hard. The faces of the crew blurred in smoke and fear. He saw Marta's tears, Elias's grin, Gray's weary contempt. He thought of Briggs, of the island, of the bones, of the ghosts of the storm. Then at least, he said, "Let us choose life while we still can." For a moment the world held still. The frigate loomed, the torch burned, the powder waited. Men shifted, muttering, "Chains or fire? Death or death." Then fate struck. A cry rose from the enemy deck, followed by chaos. Smoke erupted from the frigate's bow, not from cannon, but from fire. One of the Fortune's last desperate shots had found its mark, a powder store in the belly of the English ship. Flames licked up her rigging, black smoke poured skyward. Men ran like ants, their shouts carrying across the sea. Crow froze, the torch raised high. His eyes reflected the fire consuming the frigate. For the first time, doubt flickered across his scarred face. "Look," Matthew cried, his voice hoarse. "The sea chose for us." The Fortune's crew roared, not in triumph, but in disbelief, in madness, in sheer survival. Some dropped to their knees, kissing the bloodied deck. Others raised their arms to the burning sky. Marta laughed through her tears, whispering prayers between sobs. Crow lowered the torch slowly. His hand trembled, the flame guttered. At last, he crushed it against the rail, extinguishing the light. The barrels of powder sat silent, their threat unfulfilled. The frigate burned. Her masts toppled, her hull cracked. Men leapt into the sea, screaming as fire consumed them. The Fortune, crippled and bleeding, drifted clear as her predator sank into a furnace of her own making. When it was over, night fell quiet again. The sea hissed where fire met water, and ash rained down like black snow. The Fortune rocked gently, her crew stunned into silence. Matthew slumped against the mast, tears streaking his face. He had expected death. Instead, he watched death claim their hunters. It felt no like victory, no like mercy, but like a reprieve. One more breath stolen from the gallows. Crow stood alone at the helm, his back straight, his face lit by the embers of the burning wreck. No one spoke to him, no one dared. But Matthew thought he saw in his eyes not triumph, not fury, but something hollow, something broken. A man robbed of the death he had chosen, left only with life he could no longer control. The men called it a miracle. Marta named it God's hand. Elias called it proof that the sea itself wanted their blood. Gray muttered that accidents save no souls. But Matthew knew the truth. It was neither miracle nor mercy. It was chance. Blind, merciless chance. And chance was a crueler master than any king. That night, as ash drifted across the deck and the sea swallowed the last flames of the frigate, the Fortune's men sat in silence. They ate nothing, drank nothing, spoke nothing. They only stared at the horizon, each man trapped in his own prison of thoughts. And Matthew wondered, how many more reprieves would the sea grant before it claimed them for good? The sea after the fire was like a grave. The blackened ash of the English frigate drifted across the waves. Little flakes of burned canvas and bone falling upon the Fortune like snow. Men brushed it from their hair, their faces, their clothes. But it always returned, clinging to their skin. It felt as though the dead had followed them, drifting with them, haunting them. For days the ocean lay flat, lifeless. No wind stirred, no birds cried, no fish broke the surface. The Fortune floated adrift, her patched sails limp, her crew listless and pale. Hunger returned with a vengeance, sharper for the brief taste of plenty on the cursed island. Their bellies gnawed, their tongues cracked. The water cask stood nearly empty. Crow no longer gave orders. He stood at the helm as if carved from stone, his scar burning in the sun, his eyes fixed on horizons that gave no answer. Marta prayed aloud now, kneeling openly on the deck, her voice trembling yet strong. Elias laughed at her prayers, his lips cracked and bleeding. God, he croaked, the sea is our God, and it wants us drowned. Gray worked still, though there was little left for a surgeon. He moved among the men, checking their wounds, muttering about rot and fever. His hands trembled when he cut cloth for bandages, not from fear, but from weakness. He was as hollow as the rest. Matthew felt himself shrinking day by day. His muscles wasted, his vision blurred. He thought often of home, of fields green and wide, of bread fresh from an oven. But most of all he thought of faces. His mother's smile, a girl he once loved, the children of the village chasing him through summer grass. Those memories hurt more than hunger. It was in this hollow state that the crew began to speak again of lots. Not whispered, not hidden, spoken openly. Their voices rough but certain. One man feeds three, Elias said one evening, his eyes gleaming in the dying light. Better than 10 men starving. Better than all of us dead. Marta rose, her eyes fierce. Better we die than turn beasts. Beasts live longer. Elias spat back. The silence that followed was unbearable. Men avoided one another's eyes. The shadow of cannibalism lay heavy upon them, a greater weight than storm or shock. That night Matthew dreamed again of Briggs. In the dream, Briggs sat on the wreck of the frigate, his hands folded, his eyes calm. I left them, he said. I walked away. That was freedom. But you stayed, and now you are chained by your hunger, not by any king. Matthew woke with a cry, sweat running down his gaunt face. He knew then that Briggs haunted him not as a ghost, but as a truth he refused to accept. 3 more days passed. Men collapsed at their posts. One sailor, Thomas, staggered across the deck and fell without a sound, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. They buried him at sea, his body sliding into the black water with barely a ripple. Marta whispered prayers. Elias laughed. Gray shook his head by the 7th day. Death sat among them like a passenger. No one spoke much. No one had strength. The Fortune drifted silent, her sails limp, her crew nearly gone. And then, a shout. It was Matthew who saw it first, a dark line against the horizon. At first, he thought it a trick of hunger, a hallucination. But as the sun rose, the line grew clearer. Land, not a cursed island of bones, but a long coast, green and bright beneath the dawn. Hope flared, but fear came with it. Was it salvation? Or another trap? Another place that should not be? Crow stirred for the first time in days. His voice, low but firm, carried across the deck. Land, we sail for it." And with those words, the Fortune creaked, as though the ship herself had heard and found strength again. The sight of land did not bring the joy the crew expected. Instead, it brought silence. Men who had begged for bread and water only days before now stood in hushed awe, staring at the faint line of green etched against the horizon. Their minds, parched and hollow, struggled to believe what their eyes showed them. Was it salvation or another cruel trick? Matthew's chest swelled with a hope he did not dare to speak. His lips cracked as he whispered, "Land." But the word tasted strange, as though his mouth had forgotten what it meant. Crow's hand, once steady on the helm, now trembled slightly. He had been a man of iron, unbending, yet even he seemed shaken by the sight. His scar burned red in the sun as he muttered, "If it is real, then we take it. If it is illusion, then the sea will finish what it began." The Fortune drifted toward the coast slowly, carried more by current than by sail. The canvas hung limp, patched and torn, and men had not the strength to raise them properly. Some collapsed at the ropes, their bodies too weak to climb. Marta knelt at the bow, praying not for salvation, but for clarity, to see whether this was God's gift or his final trial. As the line of land grew clearer, the crew began to murmur. Green hills rolled against the sky, trees swayed faintly in the distance, but there was no smoke, no sign of villages, no sound of bells or voices. The coastline seemed untouched, wild, indifferent to the suffering of the men approaching. "Perhaps it is Eden," murmured Gray, his lips dry, his surgeon's hands trembling. "Or perhaps it is hell, dressed in green." Elias barked a hollow laugh. "Eden? No. If it were Eden, it would bar its gates against us. We've too much blood on our hands." By nightfall, the Fortune lay only a few miles from the coast. The men could smell the faint tang of earth, sharp and alien after months of salt and brine. It made them hungrier, more restless. They argued in whispers. Some wanted to wait until daylight. Others swore they would swim if the ship could not reach the shore. But Crow's voice cut through their mutters. "No man leaves the Fortune until I give word." The land is not always mercy. I've seen beaches where bones lie thicker than shells. You want freedom? You'll find graves first. His words chilled them, but none dared answer. The night dragged on, heavy with hunger and fear. Matthew sat awake, staring at the outline of the coast under the pale wash of moonlight. He thought of his village again, of fields where children laughed and bread cooled on windowsills. He tried to imagine stepping onto soil again, but his mind faltered. He no longer felt he belonged to land or sea. He was a thing between, a shadow kept alive by chance dot at dawn. A wind stirred. The sails filled weakly, and the Fortune creaked forward. By midday, the ship scraped against shallows, her keel groaning as if in protest. The men scrambled, throwing ropes, lowering what little remained of their battered boat. Marta kissed the deck before stepping into the skiff. Elias muttered curses. Gray whispered that the land smelled of fever, and Matthew simply gripped the oar, his knuckles white. Crow was last to descend, his face a mask, unreadable. As though he had already judged whatever awaited them ashore, the skiff touched sand. For a moment, no one moved. Then Matthew stepped onto the beach, his legs trembling. The earth was warm beneath his bare feet, solid and strange. He nearly wept, but no tears came. His body to dry, his soul to tired. The others followed. They stood in silence, staring at trees swaying in the breeze. The forest was dense, untamed, alive with the cries of unseen birds. The air smelled of damp soil and flowers. It was paradise compared to the stench of their ship, yet none felt peace for pirates. Land always carried dangers, soldiers, hostile tribes, fever, or worse, betrayal from their own. Crow planted his boots in the sand, his voice low. "We find water first, then food. No fighting, no wandering. You stray, you die. The sea has spared us once. Do not tempt it again." They obeyed, though their eyes darted to the shadows of the forest. Matthew led the way with Marta close behind, their ears straining for sound of streams. Soon they heard it, the faint trickle of water. A brook wound through the trees, cool and clear. Men fell upon it like animals, drinking until their bellies ached. Marta prayed over it, thanking heaven. Elias laughed, splashing his face, then muttered, "Now we will live long enough to kill each other." For days they explored, building a rough camp by the shore. They found fruit, roots, small animals. Hunger eased, wounds began to heal. But peace never came. At night, they heard drums. Faint, distant, steady. Not the sound of nature, but a people. Crow's face darkened. "We are not alone." The crew stirred with fear and hope both. Were these drums a sign of rescue, or the herald of new enemies? Matthew lay awake under the stars, listening to the drums echo through the jungle. Each beat felt like a warning, a heart calling to another heart. He thought of the frigate's fire, of Briggs, of chance itself. He wondered if the sea had not spared them at all, but only delivered them to a different fate. And so, the fortunate survivors stood at the edge of another trial. The ocean behind them, the forest before them, drums beating in the night. Ashes or chains had been their choice once. Now it was land or death. At dawn the drums stopped. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, like a hand pressed over the mouth of the forest. The men woke uneasy, glancing toward the trees as though eyes watched them from the shadows. Yet nothing moved but the breeze and the sway of leaves. Marta took this as a sign. She stood, lifted her hands, and whispered, "God has stilled them. The trial is ended." Her words gave some comfort, but others remained restless. Elias only sneered. "If God ended trials, we'd be drunk in a tavern, not licking dew from leaves." The eldest child, a girl with dark hair braided down her back, stepped closer. She looked at Marta, then at the ragged men behind her, then at Crow with his scarred face. For a long moment she only watched. Then she placed her basket on the ground and pushed it forward. Fruit rolled into the sand, bright as jewels. The men gasped. Food, given freely. Not taken by blade, not stolen by fear. Given. Marta wept openly now. She picked up a fruit, held it as if it were a sacred relic, and pressed it to her lips. Matthew stepped forward too, bowing slightly, his voice breaking. "Thank you," he said. Though the child did not understand, Crow's jaw tightened. His hand twitched near his sword, out of habit, out of suspicion. But then, slowly, he lowered it. His voice, when it came, was rough. "Take the gift. Show respect. We are guests, not lords." The children vanished into the forest soon after, leaving only the basket behind. The men devoured the fruit, juice running down their chins, eyes wet with disbelief. For once, they ate not as thieves, but as men welcomed, even if only by children. That night, the drums did not return. Instead, faint singing drifted from the forest. A soft, high chant carried on the wind. Marta said it was blessing. Elias muttered it was a warning. Matthew only closed his eyes and listened, letting the sound fill the hollow place in his chest. For days after, the gifts continued. Baskets of fruit, bundles of herbs, once even a clay jar of fresh water, left at the edge of the trees, always placed quietly, without a face to the giver. The pirates waited, watched, but saw no one. Yet the forest provided, as though unseen hands guided them. Life returned slowly to the Fortune's crew. Wounds closed, skin regained color. Laughter broke more easily from their lips. Men sang again, crude and low, but alive. Even Elias found himself humming a tune from childhood, surprising himself. And Matthew, sitting by the fire one evening, felt a warmth in his chest he had thought lost. Not just the warmth of food or rest, but of belonging, of being touched by kindness and earned. But with kindness came questions. Who left the gifts? Why? What price would follow? For pirates, nothing came free. Crow stood watch every night, his eyes fixed on the forest. His scar seemed deeper in the firelight, his silence heavier. When Matthew asked him what he feared, the captain answered simply, kindness is the sharpest blade. It cuts when you least expect it. On the 5th night after the children's gift, the drums returned. But this time, they were closer. The sound rolled like thunder through the trees, steady, measured, certain. The men froze by the fire, meat half cooked on their skewers, and looked toward the forest. The flames trembled in their eyes. "They've come," Gray whispered. His hand tightened around his knife, though he had no strength to use it. Marta crossed herself and whispered prayers. Elias spat into the sand and muttered, "Better spear than hunger." Crow stood slowly, his shadow tall and jagged in the firelight. His voice cut through the crackle of flame. "No steel. Not unless they strike first. We've stolen enough blood for one lifetime." The men obeyed, though their hands itched for weapons. Fear is a hard habit to break. The drums grew louder. Then, through the trees, torches appeared. Dozens of them, flickering in the night. Figures moved behind them, tall, silent, wrapped in woven cloth. Their faces painted with white and red. They walked slowly, not like hunters but like judges. The pirates rose to their feet. For a long moment, the two groups only stared across the clearing. Firelight painted the scene in gold and shadow, the smoke curling upward like a signal to the stars. Then one of the painted figures stepped forward. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, his shoulders broad. He carried no weapon, only a staff. He spoke in a language none of the crew knew, his voice deep and steady, like the sea itself. The men shifted nervously. None understood. Until Marta stepped forward, she raised her hands, her voice trembling but clear. "We're lost," she said slowly, placing her hand over her chest. "We are broken. We mean no harm." She repeated the words, softer, gentler, hoping tone could bridge what words could not. The elder watched her. His eyes, dark and sharp, lingered on her cross, on her ragged dress, on the gaunt men behind her. Then he raised his staff and gestured. Two younger figures approached, carrying baskets. They set them down by the fire. Inside lay fruit, roots, and smoked fish. The pirates gasped. Elias laughed hoarsely. Gray muttered a curse of disbelief. Matthew felt his knees weaken. Crow's face was unreadable. He stepped forward slowly, bowed his head slightly, the smallest gesture of respect. "We take your gift," he said, though he knew the elder did not understand. But the elder nodded all the same. The baskets were left, and the figures withdrew, torches fading into the forest. The drums ceased. Silence returned. The men fell upon the food, but not as wolves, as starving men tasting grace. They ate carefully, almost reverently. Marta whispered blessings between bites. Matthew felt as though each mouthful was both a gift and a test. Days passed, and the visits continued. Always at night, always with torches, always with food. The pirates began to recover. Wounds healed, laughter returned. But trust did not come easily. Each man wondered what price would be demanded. One night, Matthew found himself sitting by the shore with Crow. The captain stared at the dark horizon, the scar on his face pale in the moonlight. "Why us?" Matthew asked softly. "Why spare wolves?" Crow did not look at him. His voice was low, rough. "Perhaps they see what we were before, men, not monsters. Or perhaps they fatten us for slaughter. Hope and fear are the same chain. Boy, different links, same vine." Matthew said nothing, but in his heart, for the first time, he chose hope. The next evening, the elder returned. This time, he did not bring only food. Behind him came more figures, carrying not baskets but tools, wood, rope, clay jars of water. They laid them down, then gestured to the pirates, pointing toward the Fortune, still broken and rotting at anchor. "They want to help us," Marta whispered, awe in her voice. Crow's jot, the men, gaunt and weary, took to the task with trembling hands. Some had forgotten what it meant to work without the promise of plunder, without the whip of desperation. Now they built not for gold, but for survival. Each nail driven into the ship felt like a heartbeat, each plank laid like a prayer. Matthew worked alongside Gray, binding timbers with tar-soaked rope. Sweat ran down his thin face, but his eyes shone with a quiet determination. Marta carried water to the men, her voice humming hymns that drifted across the shore like blessings. Elias cursed and grumbled, but swung his hammer all the same, his blows fierce and stubborn, as though he were striking not wood but fate itself. Crow oversaw it all. He stood tall on the sand, his scar catching the light, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Yet there was something in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, or perhaps a memory. He gave few words, but each carried weight, tighter, stronger. Again, the villagers watched from the tree line. They never approached beyond the fire's edge, but their eyes followed every movement. Sometimes children left baskets of fruit or jars of water. Sometimes the elder came, leaning on his staff, saying nothing. His silence was both comfort and warning. Days stretched into weeks. The Fortune rose slowly from her ruin. Her masts were patched, her hull caulked, her deck scrubbed clean of blood. She was no longer the predator of the seas, but something new, a vessel reborn. Scarred yet still afloat died at night. The crew sat by the fire and spoke of what lay ahead. Some dreamed of sailing far away, to new coasts where the king's news could not reach. Others feared the sea would swallow them before dawn. Matthew often found himself staring at the villagers' fires glowing faintly in the forest. He wondered about the people who had spared them. Why show mercy to wolves? He thought of the children's eyes, bright and fearless. Perhaps mercy was stronger than fear. That Marta believed so. She prayed aloud, saying that God had set them here not to die, but to change. We were spared for a reason, she told them. Not to return to plunder, but to walk another path. Elias spat into the fire. Change, wolves don't turn sheep. The sea will have us again, same as before. Gray shook his head. And if it does, at least we'll meet it whole. Not broken, the men argued, but always their eyes drifted to Crow. He remained silent, his gaze distant, as though he already saw the choice that none wished to speak then. One evening, the elder came closer than before. He stepped into the light of the fire, his staff gleaming with carved symbols. The pirates fell silent. The elder raised his hand and pointed to the Fortune, then to the horizon beyond the sea. He spoke in his deep, steady voice, a stream of words none understood, but his meaning was clear. Godot Marta bowed her head. They give us leave, she whispered. Or they commanded. Crow stepped forward. His scar seemed to burn in the firelight. We'll take the sea again, he said, his voice heavy. Not because we are welcome, but because we are not meant to stay. Mercy ends at the shoreline. The next day, preparations began in earnest. The villagers brought more supplies. Bundles of fruit, jars of water, even small animals for meat. They set them down silently and withdrew. The pirates loaded them aboard with care, their hearts torn between gratitude and unease. Matthew stood at the rail, staring at the forest. He felt as though unseen eyes stared back. He wanted to call out, to thank them, but words failed. What thanks could bridge the blood that stained his hands? On the final night ashore, the crew gathered by the fire one last time. Marta led them in prayer. Elias drank deeply and muttered curses at the stars. Gray sharpened his knife, though there was nothing left to cut. Matthew sat in silence, his heart heavy with questions. Crow rose last. He looked at them, not as wolves, not as men bound by greed, but as survivors. His voice was low, but steady. Tomorrow we sail. I make no promises of gold, nor freedom, nor even life. The sea takes all in time, but we will not die on the shore. We will meet the waves as men, not as ghosts. The fire crackled, the forest sighed, and the Fortune waited, reborn, her timbers creaking like an old heart ready to beat again. The Fortune left the shore at dawn. The villagers watched from the tree line, their faces unreadable, their torches dim in the morning haze. No words were spoken, no hands raised in farewell. Only silence, deep and ancient, as though the land itself exhaled them back to the sea. The ship creaked as her patched sails caught the wind. She was scarred and slow, but alive. The crew stood upon her deck like men reborn. Those shadows clung still to their eyes. The gifts of the villagers, jars of water, baskets of fruit, bundles of roots, filled the hold. Mercy carried them further than plunder ever had. For hours the coastline shrank behind them until it was only a line of green upon the horizon. Then nothing at all. The sea stretched endless once more, blue and merciless. The men stared in silence, each feeling the weight of the choice they had made, to leave land, to leave safety, to embrace the ocean again. Marta prayed, her voice trembling but resolute. Gray mended lines with tired fingers. Elias spat into the wind and muttered curses, though less bitter than before. And Matthew stood at the bow, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Beside him, Crow stood as ever, his scar stark, his posture unbending. But Matthew sensed something had shifted in him. The iron had cooled, the fury dimmed. He was still captain, still wolf, yet he seemed less eager for blood and more weary of it. For 3 days the sea was calm. The crew ate, drank, worked. Their bodies grew stronger. Laughter even rose at night, though it was tentative, fragile. Hope whispered among them like a shy breeze. But on the 4th day, the wind changed. Clouds gathered, heavy and black, swallowing the sky. The sea grew restless, churning with unseen hands. The Fortune groaned, her masts trembling. Storm, Gray muttered, "She's not ready for another." The men scrambled, hauling ropes, reefing sails. Marta clung to the mast, her prayers lost in the wind. Elias cursed and laughed, eyes wild with a thrill of chaos. Crow barked orders, his voice cutting through the roar. "Hold the lines. Brace her. She'll not sink while I breathe." The storm struck with fury. Waves rose like mountains, crashing over the deck, sweeping men from their feet. Lightning split the sky. Thunder roared like cannon fire. The Fortune was tossed like driftwood, her patched timbers groaning under the strain. Matthew fought the ropes with bleeding hands. Salt stung his eyes. His lungs burned with seawater. He thought of home, of the children's laughter on the shore, of the elders' silent gaze. Was this mercy, or only delay? A mast cracked, splintering into the sea. Men screamed. One was swept overboard, Thomas's brother, James, his cry lost to the waves. Marta tried to reach him, but Crow held her back. "He is gone," the captain said, his voice raw. "Pray for him, but do not die with him." The night stretched endless. The Fortune rose and fell, her crew clinging like ants to her back. Some cursed God, others begged him. Crow stood at the helm, his face lit by lightning. A figure of iron defying the storm died at last. Near dawn, the sea began to calm. The waves softened, the wind slackened. The Fortune, battered and bleeding, still floated. Her crew, half dead with exhaustion, collapsed upon the deck. Marta wept openly, her tears mingling with the rain. Gray bound wounds with trembling hands. Elias lay staring at the sky, silent for once. Matthew dragged himself to the helm. Crow stood there, soaked to the bone, his hands white on the wheel. His eyes, usually hard, were softer now, distant. "We live," Matthew said hoarsely. Crow nodded slowly. His voice was low, almost broken. For now, they sailed on. Days passed. The sea was calmer, but food dwindled, water thinned. Hope faltered again. Men grew restless. Whispers of plunder returned, of finding a fat merchant ship, of taking what they needed. The old hunger stirred that one night. Elias rose, his voice sharp in the dark. "We can't live on prayers and roots. We are pirates. The sea owes us blood and gold. Better to take it than to starve." The men stirred, murmuring. Some nodded, others turned away. Marta shouted him down, her voice fierce. "No, we are spared for more. We are not wolves anymore." The camp broke into shouting. Knives flashed. Old instincts bared their teeth. Then Crow stepped forward. He stood tall in the firelight, his scar pale line across his face, his eyes burning. He raised his hand, and silence fell. His voice carried across the deck, steady and heavy. "No more." Elias spat. "No more. We'll die." Crow shook his head. We've already died 100 times. We've burned. We've drowned. We've starved. And each time the sea spat us back. Ask yourself why. Was it so we could spill more blood? Or so we could change? The men muttered. Matthew stared at him, wide-eyed. Marta whispered prayers of thanks. Crow's voice hardened. We are pirates no longer. If you want blood, strike me first. If you want gold, seek it in the depths. But I will not lead wolves again. Elias stood trembling, knife in hand. His eyes darted from Crow to the crew, but no one moved. One by one, men lowered their blades. Even Elias, cursing, dropped his knife to the deck. That silence followed, heavy and final. The choice was made. The Fortune sailed on, scarred but alive. Her crew reborn. They had been wolves, but now, perhaps, they could be men. And as dawn broke, painting the sea with gold, Matthew whispered to himself, not ashes, not chains, not wolves, men.